She has cooking shows on cable television, numerous of columns inside newspapers and magazines. But author Nathalie Dupree is the most proudest of her James Beard Book Award. I had a chance to talk with her for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. So you won the James Beard Book Award.
I did.
And this is your third time from what I read.
It is. I was very excited about it, though, because this is a really big book.
Yeah.
6 pounds, some ounces.
Yes.
And I've worked on it for a long time.
Wow. And for those who don't know about mastering the art of Southern cooking, can you explain briefly?
Well, it's about taking Southern cooking and learning that Southern cooks had techniques too, in the way that they cook, in the way they make a biscuit,
Yes.
or in any of the fried chicken or
Macaroni
any of the
and
things
cheese.
that you do, macaroni and cheese, and that it's a little different from what they do elsewhere in the country, and that there was a technique involved. So we write about that, and I did it with the co-author Cynthia
Yes.
Stevens
Yeah.
Gralbart.
Yeah.
We had a good time with it. Yeah.
And so from what I understand too, you have written over 11 cookbooks?
Yes, almost. Well, it depends on how you count, because
Okay.
some are paperbacks.
Oh,
but
yeah.
yeah.
And from looking back to then to now, did you ever think you would be this successful?
I never thought I'd be successful at all, I don't think.
Okay.
Not as a child, certainly. There weren't careers for women when I was a girl, and so you were supposed to be a teacher or a nurse.
Wow.
Or a mother.
Right.
Stay
Yeah.
home.
And then you have a recent book too, Southern Biscuits.
Right. That was really part of this book, but we took it out and made it a book that came out first.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Where did that idea come from?
Well, it was when we were researching this book, we realized we just had so much information on biscuits
Yes.
that we had to pull it off and put it into a Southern book.
Yes. But your writing didn't start with books. From what I understand, if I'm right, you actually began your writing career at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution.
No. I started writing, well, I guess that's true in a certain sense.
Okay.
I started when I was at Rich's Cooking School.
Yes.
Writing recipes. And then I had a column briefly for the Atlanta Journal before I wrote my first book. So
And tell me, where did that writing bug come from?
I lost my job. They closed the cooking school, and so I had to, go ahead.
Sure.
I had already written one small book, and then I wrote the second one.
Yeah.
Just to make enough money to keep going, and that was how I did New Southern Cooking. My first hardback, the 2 paperbacks I did when I was at Rich's.
And now, look, you mean you're writing for the Charleston Magazine, the Post and Courier?
Yeah, I really like it. I'm
Yes.
doing a broad-based amount of writing, just enough to enjoy what I'm doing.
Yes. And then speaking of that too, speaking of media that is, I'm sure one of those network heads came to you and said, hey, we want you to have a cook show on our particular network.
No, that didn't never happen. I did have an hour a day cooking show for the radio.
Oh, good.
That someone came to me about. But for the for television, the sponsor came to me
Is that
and
right?
suggested that I be on PBS.
Which is very rare.
Yeah, which is very rare. I was very fortunate with that. So then I went to them and said, I have money. So
Yes.
and they said, great.
And speaking of ideas, I actually read too that you actually chef for free restaurants from Spain to Virginia.
I was chef of a restaurant in Majorca, Spain. That was my first job out of cooking school. And then my second, when we left Spain, we moved to Georgia,
Yes.
to a small town social circle. And when we were there, I started a restaurant in an old barn.
Yes.
And that was open for 3 years before I got a job teaching cooking at Rich's. And then my last one was a restaurant in Richmond, Virginia.
Yes, I love Richmond.
I do too. At one of the local hotels.
Yes.
So,
That's
yeah.
awesome. Speaking of Rich's, you were the director there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering, who was Nathalie Dupree as a director?
How do you mean? I was directing the cooking school.
Right.
Yeah.
And were you strict? Were you,
Well, I taught.
Right.
It was participation, so I
Sure.
had 20 students up to in a class. and I would devise the recipes, and each two students had their own stove.
Yes.
And then they all did the same recipes. So they got a chance to see what everybody else's recipes were like.
Yes.
And how different one recipe could be from the other.
And I learned too that most of your students went on actually from creating their own recipes.
Well, I have hundreds of students now that are in restaurants or cooking schools or teaching or writing. Yeah,
that's
it's
awesome.
fun.
Yeah, I bet it is. Well, I want you to walk down memory lane with me to 1957. The year you graduated from Mount Vernon High School in Alexandria, Virginia.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And I'm still close to members of my high school class.
Really? Tell me, were you a crime student or the most popular person on campus?
No, I was only there a year and a half, but I made many close friends there, and so that was really great. But we were all kind of in the same boat, I think. We were all teenagers, so yeah.
And speaking of education, let's talk about Le Cordon Bleu in 1970.
Yes. The Le Cordon Bleu.
Pardon me.
Yeah.
My pronunciation's bad.
Yeah, is that right? Le, we have to
okay.
say. Le Cordon Bleu was in London, and when I married my former husband, he got a job in London.
Yes.
We went over there, and I sort of stumbled into a cooking class.
Wow.
And it was a demonstration, and I went home and tried to do everything I saw in the demonstration, and I made a big mess.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it was puff pastry wrapped around a lamb chop with a sauce chasseur.
Yes.
And the sauce was on the floor and the pastry was on the ceiling. And I had invited guests, and it made me so mad that I went back and signed up for a full course.
Wow. And then later you came back to the States, to the Vermont College of Fine Arts.
Well, that was just a few years ago that I went back. I had received an honorary doctorate from Johnson and Wales,
yes.
but I had not graduated from college.
Okay.
But I went and applied at the College of Vermont about 5 years ago.
Wow.
To get my master's degree in creative fiction,
Yes.
Nonfiction,
Yes.
creative nonfiction,
Right.
and received it a few years ago,
Wow.
and just enjoyed it thoroughly.
I bet
so
you did.
I got my doctorate before I got my master's.
Interesting.
Honorary doctorate.
Yeah. And speaking of the unknown, what galvanized you to actually run for politics against Jim DeMint?
Because he's a demented, we call him.
You can be you can be candid here.
I didn't believe in most of what he believed in, but in particular, I think that our port needed an earmark and needed some real support to get things done. And I felt that his views, his social views, many times were anachronistic and out of touch.
Yeah.
And I believe in public education to a much greater degree than he does. I was very upset when he said that unmarried women with children and people that were gay should not be allowed to teach. And considering that he is pro-life, I felt that what he wanted those women to do was just to jump off of the cliff with their babies, because he certainly didn't want them to be able to support themselves.
Yeah. Well, describe to me the following in one word. Food.
The what?
Describe to me the following in one word. Food.
Oh, well, let's see. Describe food. Well, food is the strongest control issue there is. It's the greatest power there is. The people, everyone has to eat from the moment they're born. It's the first thing they get to decide they want to do, and it's the last thing that they get to make a choice about when they die, whether or not to pull the tubes.
Yeah.
And so it is terribly important. It's, as I say, the strongest control issue we have. And within that, I think we should eat what we enjoy. We should learn how to treat it with respect. I'm not as political about food as many other people are. I think as many people that can should grow food and learn how to prepare food so they understand where food comes from, and so that they understand how to feed themselves. Because as you walked in and we had some cookies for you that we never gave to you, but if you make something, you know how many calories are in it.
Sure.
And then you want to give it to someone else. But if you've never made it yourself, it's pretty easy to eat a whole box of cookies by yourself and not realize that that's what you put 2 cups of sugar in or whatever. And so I just think everyone has to learn how to control their own food and to control their own body.
Sure.
And how to feed themselves, because of course that's nurturing.
Yeah.
And I love cooking myself. Enjoying the process, I think, is different than the other large part that food has.
Yes.
I enjoy the process of cooking, and I cook for my husband almost every night.
Oh, good.
We'd rather eat in than go out.
Yeah.
But I think the act of feeding someone or being fed is yet again another function of food.
One word to describe writing.
Hard.
Would you make it easy?
No, my husband says something like, good writing is hard work, and bad writing is too. So that's the way that it is.
Yes.
Yeah.
One word to describe politics.
Well, of course, everything is really political. We just don't think of it that way, but most of our choices are political.
Yeah.
In the broad sense of the word, in terms of elective office, I think that more people should run for office. I really believe that we should have financial limits to spending in campaigns, that our campaign spending is way out of control, and I do not believe that corporations are people. Yeah. And if they are, they should pay personal taxes.
One word to describe Mark Sanford versus Elizabeth Colbert Bush.
Well, I'm afraid that I think that Mark Sanford is an embarrassment to the state of South Carolina, that he defaulted on his duty to the state by leaving the state and not letting anyone know where he was and spending the taxpayers' money to do it. His private business is none of my concern, but those things are my concern. I don't understand how anyone who has defaulted on a job that he's already have can possibly be capable in the next job without really owning the fact that he did that. And I don't think he did. So that is the negative about him. I also don't believe in his fiscal policies at all. I don't think he understands money. Elizabeth Colbert Bush is a very intelligent woman, inexperienced, and she ran a good campaign. I hope she runs again. But she did not have enough political experience to beat someone who
is a powerhouse.
I don't know that I think he's a powerhouse. I think he's clever and marketer enough to know that debating Nancy Pelosi would get ignorant people to vote for him.
One word to describe Nathalie Dupree.
I don't have any idea that I could do that. You're supposed to be able to have an elevator speech about yourself, but I don't
that's all right.
think I do. I just love living.
Yes.
You know, I love life.
Yeah, let's talk about family for a moment. You have been married to Jack Bass for some time now.
Almost 20 years.
When you think of him, what comes to mind?
Oh, he's pretty smart.
Yes. He is.
He is pretty smart, yes.
We know that you love cooking and writing and, of course, politics now. But what is something else that people don't know about you?
Well, I think most people don't realize that I really enjoy humor.
Yes.
I have a very dry sense of humor, and I enjoy making people laugh.
Yes.
That's one of the things I enjoy, too. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about your future. What do you see yourself doing 5 to 10 years from now?
I'm probably spending a lot of time in bed at my age. But I think I'd like to write a memoir. I'd like to do, my passion right now is trying to figure out what to do about the food deserts in South Carolina and how to get food into those areas so that everyone in South Carolina can have a sufficiency of good food to eat. That's a real mission of mine.
That is awesome. Nathalie Dupree, it was so great talking to you.
Wonderful talking to you.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Anytime.
Good to see you.
Yeah, likewise.